Can Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders be the best quarterback in 2024? The short answer is yes, he can. But what is that pathway? What needs to happen? How does he need to play? And what other factors need to happen in order for Shedeur to be the top quarterback in 2024? Right? He's definitely one of the top quarterbacks heading into the season. But it's a little bit different season this year than it was last year as far as the quarterback landscape in college football. Last year we had two for sure, no doubt, top guys, right? And that was Caleb Williams and Drake May. This year's a little bit different. But even last year, like you had like the top guys, but you had a good list of who was going to be behind them. Bo Nix, Michael Penix. Right? Like you had an idea of guys who are behind those guys. Like this year's a little bit different. There's no like for sure set guy. I think you have a bunch of guys that could be, right? From Carson Beck to Shedeur Sanders to Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe. I mean, Quinn Ewers. You got several guys like in that category. It's like, yeah, he could be it. He could be it. But I don't think you have like a for sure, like no doubt, hey, these guys are the top 2 or 3 guys for sure, right? I think you have you have a bunch of guys that could potentially be the top in 2024. So I do think there's a pathway for Shedeur Sanders. I think a lot of stuff has to happen differently than last year, of course. I think it's a tough schedule, but I think there's a pathway there. And before we keep going on, if this is your first time tuning in the channel, sincerely thank you. We're just a big quarterback hub. We talk all things quarterback. So if quarterbacks are kind of your niche, please consider subscribing, liking the video. We usually spend our time talking about college quarterbacks. So if that's your thing, please consider subscribing and following us along, right? So what's the pathway? Well, number one, hopefully a lot better offensive line play, right? I think it goes without saying you're going to have better play from the surrounding cast for Shedeur to be the top quarterback in 2024. But there really is a pathway. I don't think you have to have like the TCU game, right? Where you had 500-something yards and you just 10 yards per attempt. You're pushing the ball downfield. I don't think that has to happen all the time, but I think you're going to have multiple games like that TCU game, especially with the schedule that the Big 12 has. And we're going to get to the opponents in a second, but I think you have to have multiple games like you had against TCU. 2-3 games, right? Like that's a lot to ask, but I think for him to be the top guy in 2024, I think you're going to have a repeat TCU game, at least 2, maybe 3. Then you're going to have to average a few games that were similar to his performance against like Stanford and USC, but combine the whole game, right? Like USC, they started not great, and they had a great finish. Stanford, they started super hot, then did not have a good finish. So you need to have like a consistent game like those games, right? I think you need to average a few of those type of games. Maybe the numbers don't have to be as high because they're really high numbers, but you're going to have several games like that, right? So let's say you have to have 2 games, 3 games like TCU, maybe 2 games. Then you have, let's say, 4 games like 4 to 5 games like the Stanford USC, and then a few games like Arizona, Oregon State, but you have to win them. Those are close games, but they were like grindy type games, which I like seeing, where Shedeur has to find a way to win, right? So I think you're going to have a few of those games, but you find a way to win. Like you were close to beating Arizona. You were close to beating Oregon State, even though they jumped out, right? But you have to find a way to win. The biggest thing I think you need to avoid is the games like UCLA and Oregon. If you have a game like UCLA and Oregon, it's going to be tough to be considered the top quarterback in 2024, right? The yards per attempt were under 5. And yes, I get it. Offensive line issues, especially against both schools, but against UCLA and Oregon. I get like offensive line was a big issue, but it doesn't matter. Like if they're a big issue, then it's going to be hard for Shedeur to be the best quarterback in college football. So you have to avoid those type of games, and then you have to show up every game to these big primetime games. I was looking through the schedule, and when I've been doing these videos about talking about could this quarterback be the best quarterback in college football, most teams will have like 4 or 5 really big primetime games, right? Like Georgia goes to Alabama, Georgia goes to Texas. Like Carson Beck, to be the best quarterback, has to perform really, really good in those 2 games. But going through Colorado's schedule, like no game is a gimme game. You really don't have any gimmies, right? Colorado State and what was it? North Dakota State open up. North Dakota State. Like those are probably your easiest opponents, but you know North Dakota State's nothing to sniff at. Colorado State, we saw they almost beat Colorado. Maybe should have beat Colorado last year, right? So if we go through the schedule, you got to show up at Nebraska right off the bat. But if you look at the Big 12 and like these opponents, I think it comes down to playing really good against Kansas State, playing really good against Arizona, playing really good against Utah, really good against Oklahoma State, Kansas, and I think Texas Tech's going to be good too. But I mean, that leaves off Baylor and UCF. Like those aren't teams to sniff at. Like I think in Cincinnati, right, they're going to be improved. I think every team on this schedule, you're going to have to really show up. So I think if you avoid these UCLA Oregon games, that's your first chance. That's your first stop shop to potentially be the best quarterback. And then if you have more games like Stanford, USC than you do Arizona, Oregon State, you should be in a really good position. And then if you can eke out like a 2 TCU games, if you eke out 3, especially if they're against Kansas State, Utah, Oklahoma State, who went to the Big 12 championship last year, like if you can have your biggest games against some of these toughest opponents that you have, I think that could bode really well for Shedeur. Sanders also helps you have Travis Hunter, one of the best athletes in college football, and you have a good surrounding cast, at least people to throw to, right? So if the offensive line is improved, if you're able to protect Shedeur and he makes some improvements, and we talked about his improvement areas, he broke down some film, what he needs to do, so I encourage you to go back and check that out. But I think that's the pathway for Shedeur to be the best. There's no gimme games. You got to show up every game, and you have to have these tier of games, these tier of how you play. You got to have a few in the elite category. You got to have a lot in the really good. Then maybe just a few in the good where you just find a way to win. You have to have no in the bad category, if that makes sense, right? But Colorado fans or just college football fans, I want to hear from you. One, do you think Shedeur can be the best quarterback in college football? Let me know, yes or no, and give me your opinion why. And then 2, what's the pathway for it to happen? Because if Carson Beck down at Georgia fires off great games against these SEC opponents, or if Quinn Ewers fires out great games against these SEC opponents, it's going to be hard for Shedeur to be considered the best. That's why I think Shedeur has to show up and have these really good games against all these opponents on their schedule, which I think is an underrated schedule. Like, it's a tougher schedule than probably given credit for. Like Baylor could bounce back. UCF at UCF is going to be a tough game. Are you going to be favored? I have no idea. So it really goes back to showing up at every game. But Colorado fans, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What's the pathway? What do you think Shedeur needs to do? Let me know your thoughts. And again, if you like this quarterback type niche content, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing. It really does help the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.